But for workers out there, they can know under Premier Ford that the minimum wage is going to go up every October. And again, it's important that we build back a better Ontario for all workers, rebalance those scales. That's why we continue to ensure that we're bringing in more opportunities for workers so they get more paychecks, bigger paychecks, and more opportunities and more workplace protections.
Ontario Labour Minister Monty McNaughton announcing today the minimum wage is going up 50 cents to $15.50 an hour. In his comments today, McNaughton said the government wants to improve conditions for all workers. 4 years ago, back in 2018, Premier Doug Ford scrapped the province's planned increase laid out by the former Liberals just 3 months after being elected. At the time, Ford said raising it would hinder job creation in the province. Today, the Ford government is now telling Ontarians that a 50-cent bump is coming this fall. For more on this, we welcome to CP24 Tonight Ryan Mallow with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Paul Taylor is the Executive Director of Food Share Toronto. And Craig Pickthorne is with the Ontario Living Wage Network. Thanks to all of you. Craig, can someone here in the GTA comfortably live on $15.50 an hour? I mean, what does that look like?
Great. That means that you're going to be short by $230 per week. That's how much the living wage, or the minimum wage, is short of the living wage in Toronto.
How do you come up with that number? Explain that a bit more.
So we look at all the major and minor expenses that a worker would face. We look at, obviously, a big one would be shelter, then food, transportation, and childcare. We also factor in any government taxes, transfers, or benefits. And what you get at the end is a living wage. So for Toronto, the living wage is $22.08.
Okay, so Paul, let's bring you in on this. Explain what Food Share estimates is a living wage for people here in Toronto and what your company is doing about this.
Yeah, the living wage is far more than $15.50, which has been proposed. You know, when I saw this announcement, to be quite frank, I thought more of way too little and far too late. You know, Food Share, the charity that I work at, is an organization that's committed to doing everything we can to support healthy workers, and that includes, and healthy communities, and that includes paying a minimum wage that is a living wage. It's unconscionable that we have governments that are legislating people into poverty by not paying wages that we know allow people to live, not to mention folks on income supports like welfare and ODSP. It's actually quite awful, the situation in this province and what folks are forced to navigate.
Okay, so Ryan, the money has to come from somewhere. So how are business owners feeling about this today? And will the cost of this wage increase be then passed on to consumers?
So I think traditionally when we see a minimum wage increase, that is what happens. Business owners do look to pass on the cost. That is going to be a little bit more difficult than it has been in the past because business owners have had to do that throughout the pandemic as they waded through various periods of lockdown or restrictions. A lot of the elasticity in prices that was there is really gone. I think important to note about today's increase, though, is that this was expected. I know it sounds like it's a bit of a new idea, but the minimum wage in Ontario has been indexed to inflation since, I believe, 2014. The Ford government put a bit of a pause on it after the jump to 14 under the previous government. But we have seen this is the third inflationary increase during the pandemic from $14.25, $14.35, now up to $15.50. So I think this was expected. But that being said, wage pressure is another profit insensitive thing that business owners have to deal with. And again, there's not a ton of profit to go around to reinvest right now.
So, Ryan, can you talk a bit about what you're hearing from Canadian businesses, how they're prepared here in Ontario to burden this cost?
So I think we're hearing from businesses the same thing that we're hearing from people. The cost of living is up. The cost of business is up. It is all about affordability right now. Amongst our membership, we are seeing record highs in terms of wage increase intentions. We know that finding labor right now is incredibly difficult. And a lot of business owners have tried. Half of the business owners that are experiencing a labor shortage have tried upping wages to attract new employees, and only half have found success in that. A lot of times they just can't find the person. So I think that, you know, wages are part of it, but there's a lot of affordability conversation to have going on, and we do want to see what the government is going to do to lower the cost of doing business as much as we're looking at the wage side of the equation on the cost of living.
Okay, so Craig, Ryan just mentioned he sort of saw this coming. We haven't seen an increase for some time now. How might this impact people who make slightly above the minimum wage? I mean, could this have a trickle-up effect?
I think so, because one thing that's much different about the living wage is that it comes out every November. The first Monday of every November, we announce living wage rates. So that's one way that it's different. And you speak about the trickle-up effect. I think that anytime you raise the wage of the lowest earners, it benefits the whole community. This is a well-known fact.
Paul, I want to just mention things that your company does, that your charity does. You know, paying $22 an hour and also paying people who come in for interviews. Why implement things like this?
You know, I think it's really, and maybe I should correct also that we pay a minimum of $24 an hour. We pay a minimum of $24 an hour, and when folks come in for an interview, we also pay for that. We pay $75 an hour because we think, again, we have a commitment and a responsibility to doing everything we can to create healthy people and healthy communities. And we wish that our governments felt the same commitment. And I just want to respond to something that was said earlier, and it's that, you know, there's not a lot of evidence that suggests when wages go up that, that the pressures make it unbearable. What ends up happening is that people, low-income folks, have more money to spend, and they're spending it in their local communities. So I think there definitely is a trickle-up experience that happens when we increase wages. So it's time to really get on with it in a big way.
Okay, so let's talk about this narrative, because this is something that came up, you know, several years ago, the last time we saw an increase to the minimum wage. Ryan, we know the pandemic was challenging for so many people, and that's part of the reason this announcement was meant today. But are you concerned that this could be a job killer, or what kind of impact could this move have on jobs and the economy?
So I'm not quite sure about job killer. I know that we've seen in the past that hasn't necessarily materialized. I think perhaps a job changer. Certainly things around hours worked, and business owners do have to wind up making adjustments. We do tend to see price increases as well. The difference, of course, this time is we've never come off of a global pandemic before. The average Ontario small business is in $160,000 of COVID-related debt, regardless of any other debt that they might have been carrying before that. You know, here in the city of Toronto, some industries were shut down over 400 days, and that's to no customers at all. So it's a very different setting coming out right now. And again, anything that impacts affordability or adds cost pressure is going to exacerbate recovery and the difficulty, the uphill climb for recovery for a lot of small businesses.
All right, we have to talk about the timing of this too. Of course, we're 2 months away from an election. The NDP and Liberals promising to further increase the minimum wage if they take office to $16. How much of an election issue is affordability? And Craig, what would you like to see policymakers do to address this?
Well, one thing, it would be further, the Liberals mentioned they want to examine looking at a regional wage that's tied to the local expenses. I can save them some trouble. We already do that in 27 communities in Ontario, and we add more every year. One thing that we noticed last year that affected our living wage rates was the introduction of a childcare subsidy. And so it really showed how much of an impact collectively we can have on affordability. So that's what I would say.
Paul, any additional thoughts and your opinion on this idea of a regional minimum wage?
Yeah, I think a huge kudos to Craig and the work of his organization. FoodShare certainly benefited from that work. Thank you, Craig. The reality is affordability is affecting everyone, and obviously it's affecting those with the lowest incomes the most. And I think it's important to also recognize who those folks are. Those are low-wage workers. Those are also folks on social assistance and ODSP. The majority of them are women, they're young people, they're immigrants, they're Black, they're Indigenous folks, and they're people of color. And we live in one of the richest provinces in a rich country. We shouldn't have to beg and shame our governments into doing what's right.
Okay, Ryan, I'll give you the last word here. You know, we're talking about businesses that you've mentioned have suffered so much during the pandemic and frankly struggling with affordability themselves right now. What do they want to see from this government in the next couple of months during the election? What are they looking for?
Well, I think the key is addressing that affordability. And of course, affordability for people affects affordability for business too. If we are pricing employees out of working in Toronto, it makes it very hard for a downtown Toronto business to be able to attract employees and bring in. So that's important. The other thing we'd like to see is, as a result of this, what has happened is businesses are having to hire underqualified employees and train them up. They're happy to do that, but that comes at a serious time commitment, a serious financial cost. We would like to see the government acknowledge that and provide a training credit as well, so we can get the labor force up to where small businesses need it to be to, again, get on that road to recovery and really get back to where we were.
All right, lots to follow here. A really important conversation. We so appreciate your time tonight. Ryan Mallow, Paul Taylor, and Craig Pickthorne. Thanks.